Hi, I'm Ashley Adamson. Welcome to another episode. Today we're going to talk about kind of like the hardest thing in being trans. Where do I start? Today I went to the doctor, looking forward to my appointment because this one is to get a prescription to go see a therapist for quote-unquote depression, because I am interested in exploring the option of getting a vaginoplasty. But in German healthcare, I don't just get a vaginoplasty. I need to wait 2 years of going through therapy to get that. So I'm not sure. I need to wait 2 years. And on top of that, I need to find a therapist. And so this has been a long kind of journey for me since I moved here last year to even find a therapist. If you're in America, you might say, what? It's hard to find a therapist? Yeah, it's hard, really, really hard, especially with COVID, especially because trying to find a transgender specialized and then also speaks English, and also in a country where everyone gets healthcare for seeing a therapist. So it's nice that everyone gets it, but it also means there's a limit because everyone can just get therapy. So this has been a really long journey for me. It's been hard because I've spent countless hours on the phone talking to my health insurance company, them not understanding that what the process looks like for a transgender person. Also me dealing with the fact that I don't speak German well, and then dealing with all these blockers and paperwork pieces. So that's all to say it's been very, very difficult for me. And so I had an appointment today that was sort of like I'm gonna get a prescription from my doctor, and then all is going to be good because I've already lined up the therapist. I've got that far. And I showed up and they said I didn't have an appointment. And I spent a little bit of time trying to say, no, I think I have an appointment. I talked to the doctor who said they were gonna get me an appointment. And they said, sorry, you don't have an appointment. But, maybe you can come back in a few hours and maybe we can squeeze you in. So it wasn't all bad, but it was enough for me to, as I was walking back home, to feel something that I haven't felt in a while. And if you're earlier in your transition, maybe you might relate to this feeling, that feeling of being trans, being blocked by something external to you, or being treated in some way that you don't deserve just because you're trans, and to have to go through some amount of bullshit because you are trans. Not because you're a bad person, not because you're doing something wrong, but because you are simply trans. And this is the shit that really gets me. It doesn't make me mad. I'm getting mad right now just talking about it. But I came back to my place and I laid down on that bed and I cried. And I didn't understand it because objectively speaking, all I did is I went to an appointment where they just said, you don't have an appointment, but we might be able to give you an appointment a few hours later. But that meant so much more to me. It meant the continual grind of trying to get simple coverage and direction on healthcare that I just needed to get, that as a trans person is just fundamental to my needs and my existence. To have that become this huge problem that I've been just slogging at for over a year now, it means so much more because I was just ready to let that go, but I couldn't. And so I lay there on my bed crying, probably like how you've done before when you're dealing with hard things, especially when you're dealing with trans hard things, right? How do you work through your pain? When something comes up, how do you treat yourself? How do you approach your feelings? How do you let them go? I cry. I curled up into a ball and I cried, and I felt so alone in this struggle because it can feel very lonely. It brings up a little bit of tears just thinking about that feeling. And I remembered in that moment as I was crawled up and crying, that initial time that I cried, that deep sadness, that dark hole that I was in 3.5 years ago when I was at the beginning of my transition and accepting that I was a woman. And feeling this, why me? Why does this have to happen to me? What have I done? Why is the world treating me this way? Will I ever be accepted? Will I ever be loved? Will I ever find what I'm seeking? Have you asked yourself any of those questions? Yeah. And so this brings up this deeper idea, this deeper notion of kind of like this, all of the struggle that you go through when you're trans and how it all revolves around your trans identity, but not necessarily your identity with you being trans, but that other people recognize you or see you or don't recognize you as being trans. Does that make sense? Let me say it in another way. I don't identify as trans. I don't even identify as a person. I just identify as a... What do I identify as? So it's contextual, right? So if I'm at a cocktail party, hi, I'm Ashley. But deeper down, if you and I were to be face to face in some realm where we've passed our casualness, I tell you, I'm nothing. I don't really identify with anything except the fact that I experience myself within this body. But in a world that you occupy, in this place that you experience things, you are more than just like a nothing. You are a something, and that something is ascribed the label of trans so that other people can easily understand and digest your infiniteness. So they can say very specifically what you are or what you are not, or how you're going to be treated or how you're going to be seen. And this is the struggle. It's the other world, how they treat you. And then because they treat you in this way because you are trans, you have your own experience of that experience, which is being on the receiving end. Now, I don't want to get too deep into the idea of being a victim, because the victim mentality breeds all sorts of concepts and thoughts and feelings that aren't healthy, like that your world is out of your control or that the world happens to you rather than you happen to the world. And I believe that very firmly that you happen to the world. I take the stance of happening to it, because to let the world happen to me is to say that I have no ability to overcome the obstacles or to change the world as I want. I mean, I live in Berlin, and I chose to do this. I took all the risk and made it happen. So this is, my life, and this is us sharing energy here. I believe you can also happen to the world. That's just how I see things. If you don't see things that way, that's totally cool too. But while the world may happen to me and I may feel this thing of, oh, I am trans and this whole system is set up to basically make my life harder, because the people that set it up don't understand what it is to be trans, I still have control over my own emotions. I still have my control over my experience. I still have that locus of control. Wherever you are, when you are struggling, when you are having something that's really hard and difficult, it's really good to focus on what you do have control over. Because if you continue to focus on what you don't have control over, it's what my dad always says, crying over spilt milk. That idea that the milk has already been spilt. There's nothing that will change it. But how are you going to change your situation? How are you going to change where you're at? And I see this with all these new people that are new trans, and as they go through their transition, I've been transitioning long enough and talking to other people who are trans to see them go through their own phases. And I talk about this in my book, which you can get down below in the links, which you should get, is this idea of, it's like I don't always hear, but it's a very common symptom of trans people to complain and talk about the pain of what they're going through, because it's so freaking painful, isn't it? And I've seen people where they're so depressed, they're so upset, they're so sad, and it's so dark that I actually sometimes have to unfollow them because I'm like, yo, you're bringing down my energy. I can't watch this right now. I need to focus on lifting myself up, which is also a good practice. If you are looking at, here's another tip. If you're looking at media and you're consuming stuff that makes the world darker, it might help you to actually take a step back and focus on things that make the world lighter. But anyways, they go through this process. This transition happens in this process, and I call this the trough of despair in the book. But you go through the trough of despair where it's really, really, really painful. And it feels like there are times where you are questioning everything. You're questioning your existence. You're questioning whether you can do this or not, if it's always going to be terrible. But every single time that you take that step to move forward and to get over that hump, that lump, that thing in your way, you get stronger and you get more powerful. And so when I see people 2 or 3 years later, they are finally thriving in some shape or form, and they've done so well. And I forgot about that whole experience of going through all that tumbling. Not like conceptually, but in terms of feeling, I haven't had that feeling in a while because it's been in the back of my mind. It's been something that I've just been trying to move forward and just being as reasonable as possible. I don't deal with the misgenderings anymore. I don't deal with trying to figure out my identity and who I am. I don't deal with like finding people that accept me. I've gone through all of those stages, as well as, finding where my money is and taking care of my health and figuring out where I get my hormones and all of those things. So it's easy to forget when you're later stage like me, 3.5 years in your transition, to suddenly get hit by that familiar feeling of that time when things were not so easy, and to have all these things come back to you. And so this may have knocked me down more than a year ago, like maybe when I was less developed 2 years ago, 2.5. But now, but now I have that ability to overcome and to move through these things more effortlessly. There are tears. I didn't feel like making a video today, but here I am because Minty suggested I do make this video. So thank you, Minty, in my Discord. By the way, my Discord's open if you want to join down below. There's a lot of sweet people there to kind of just talk to and connect with. I'm there too, but you're gonna have to tag me to get my attention. There's a lot going on here. But I want this to be a message for you to think about for yourself, which is how are you getting stronger? Every time you're facing these pains and these things that become more and more, or not more difficult, but these things that are difficult for you, is it getting a little easier? It may not seem that way when you compare A to B, or B to C, or C to D, these different situations. But once you get to X5, compare situation X5, which is like the 5th iteration of the alphabet, to A1, the first problem that you had. It's so far. And the longer that you go, these things get easier. So wherever you are in your transition, wherever you are in your experience of being a human, just think about how far you've come. Just think about all the things that you've already gotten over and you've already processed and moved through, and how that's preparing you and making you stronger for all of the things that you need to do now and you need to overcome now or experience now. You are so much more stronger than who you were a year ago, 2 years ago. I know sometimes it may feel like you just haven't gotten as far as you want to be because you set a standard that's a little bit higher than where you are. And that's okay to have that standard because it'll push you in a direction where you can create things. Or maybe you found your standard and you are where you are, which is beautiful. But why are you watching this video if you're not struggling in some shape or form? I just want to say that you're valid. I want to say that you are where you are, and that is totally perfect. I know it seems imperfect, but that's the whole thing about perfect is perfectly imperfect. And that you have the strength to overcome and move through all these other things that you have that are coming up for you, and that you will encounter that you don't even know yet. I'm sending you love. And today I've, been feeling a little down. But even just doing this and talking to you today has strengthened me and given me more resolve and reflecting back on how strong I can be too. I'll see you in another episode. Bye.